August 7th, 1942. Tulagi and Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The dawn is not quiet. The air thrums with the deep-bellied roar of ship engines, the slap of waves against Higgins boats, and the far-off thud of naval guns raking the tree line. Spray cuts across the faces of men hunched low in their landing craft. Marines in the first wave, rifles hugged to their chests, and, tucked among them in unmarked dungarees, the men the Japanese never expected, U.S. Navy Construction Battalion 6, the Seabees. They aren't here to dig foxholes. They're here to build an airfield. In a place where one does not build anything at all. An island of choking vines, stifling humidity, and soil so soft you sink to the ankle with every step. The Marines surge ashore first, spreading through the palms. The Seabees follow, stepping into the chaos before the shooting has even stopped. 20-year-olds with picks, 40-year-olds with Union Card calluses, carpenters, steel workers, crane operators, quarrymen, suddenly wearing web belts and 45 sidearms. Keep your heads down and your engines ready. A boatswain's mate yells as the last of them scrambles ashore. From the tree line comes the dull crack of scattered rifle fire. The Japanese garrison expected a probing raid, not a landing force backed by carriers and cruisers. But the Seabees are unshaken. Many are older than the Marines protecting them. Some ran construction crews long before most of the platoon leaders here were out of high school. Their unofficial motto spreads among them like an oath. The difficult we do immediately. The impossible takes a little longer. Before noon, the first small group pushes inland to scout the partially completed Japanese airstrip the Imperial engineers had begun carving from the jungle. A rough swath of pressed coral, hacked open by forced laborers and left half-finished when U.S. naval bombardment forced a hurried evacuation. There are dragonflies drifting across churned coral. Jungle steam rises like smoke from heaps of splintered palms. Tool crates lie shattered and abandoned. The Japanese had been close enough that intelligence already had a name for the airfield: Lunga Point. To the Seabees, it looks less like a construction site and more like a dare. Chief Carpenter's mate Clifton Paris wipes his brow and stares out across the shredded clearing. "You could land a plane here," he mutters, "if you wanted to die on impact. But the brass does want aircraft here. Desperately. The plan is impossibly ambitious. In days, not weeks, not months, this raw wound in the jungle must become a functioning airfield, fought over mile by mile, hour by hour. The Marines are still rooting out snipers within hearing distance of where the survey stakes will be driven. The Seabees go to work anyway. Bulldozers are winched ashore under sniper fire. Cranes rumble through mud that swallows boots and threatens to swallow men. Operators sit exposed in open cabs, helmets ringing when mortar fragments strike steel. "They're shooting at us," a young operator shouts. "Then grade faster," his chief replies. It is construction as combat. Engineers working inside rifle range. Marines crouched behind felled palm trunks, trading bursts of fire with enemy pickets deeper in the brush. Sweat fills their eyes. The jungle clogs every saw blade. The smell is a hot stew of gas fumes, cut wood, and rotting vegetation. By nightfall of the first day, the Seabees have widened and staked the Japanese clearing into something resembling a runway perimeter. By the second, they have crushed more coral under improvised rollers. By the third, they are laying Marston matting, interlocking perforated steel planks. While overhead, the shriek of Japanese reconnaissance float planes warns them the enemy is watching. Word spreads quickly across the Japanese defensive line inland. Americans are building an airfield. Impossible, officers insist. This terrain cannot be graded in the rainy season. No heavy machinery can survive the mire, not without months of preparation. But the Americans are not waiting months. At night, under blackout tarps, they weld by the glow of shielded lamps. By daybreak, the buzz of graders and the clank of matting carry miles out to sea, where Japanese scouts radio frantic reports back to Rabaul. The Marines notice it too, a kind of reckless momentum. As one rifleman from the 1st Marine Division later recalled, "They hit the ground running, and they just didn't stop. They were building the base while we were still fighting for it." On the evening of the 4th day, exhausted Seabees crouch at the jungle's edge as a runner hurries up from the command post. In his hand, a scribbled timetable from the aviation command. The impossible has been moved up again. The first fighters are expected soon, not after the airfield is finished, while it is still being shaped out of living jungle. They will have to land on whatever exists when they arrive. The bulldozers keep moving. August 11th, 1942. Lunga Point, Guadalcanal. By the 5th morning, the Seabees are ghosts of sleep, shirts plastered to their backs, boots sour with mildew. They eat as they work, cold sea rations on engine housings, coffee in dented canteen cups, while a road grader shrieks past. The jungle around them is still alive with snipers. Every slam of a dozer blade echoes like artillery. What little shade exists comes from the hulks of felled palm trunks dragged by tractors into makeshift revetments. Marine scouts comb the ridgeline above while the heavy equipment idles below, radiators coughing steam. The earth smells of salt and iron. Coral dust cakes everything white, uniforms, faces, eyebrows. So the men look like specters more than soldiers. A petty officer jokes that the Japanese will think the Americans unleashed ghosts from the coral reef. But behind the sweat and banter is urgency, the raw, electric understanding that if they do not finish this runway first, the enemy will finish them. Just before noon, a forward observer on the coastal rise spots a column of spray flashing across the sea. Incoming Japanese shelling from a light cruiser probing the channel. When the rounds walk closer, Marines scatter into fighting holes. The Seabees don't run. They lurch their equipment into motion. "Keep pushing," Chief Paris bellows across the din. "We build or we bleed for nothing." Another operator, a wiry mechanic from Missouri named Roscoe Bailey, presses his foot down on the throttle of a Caterpillar D7 like he's outracing the incoming barrage. Shell bursts gazer coral fragments skyward behind him. He flinches, ducks, and keeps going. Every second of commotion creates a storm of dust, dust that from offshore looks like work, relentless work. When the barrage lifts, the men climb back out like ants, shake off coral grit, and continue as though mortar fire were just another weather inconvenience. Even the Marines stare sometimes. One grimy rifleman mutters to another, "We're the fighters, but they're the crazy ones." That afternoon, the first air recon from Rabaul makes its pass. A Japanese float plane banks low over the treetops, engine droning like a saw blade. Cameras click through the cockpit glass. The pilot stares in disbelief. The Americans are not preparing a runway. They are finishing one. Word races across the Japanese chain of command. The enemy has nearly completed the Lunga Airfield. Rear Admiral Tanaka's reaction is swift and furious. Carrier-based bombers are ordered to strike the next day to wipe out the clearing before it becomes operational. Before American planes can use it. Before Marines can base fighters here. Before this nameless jungle clearing becomes a fortress. But the timetable is already broken. August 12th, just after dawn. The jungle is still wet with night rain when a radio runner tears up the half-made causeway, gasping, "Planes inbound. American, coming here. The Seabees freeze where they stand. Not Japanese bombers, American wildcats. The dirt isn't hardened. The matting isn't all laid. There are still depressions, soft as tar. But there is enough. A cheer doesn't go up. There is no time and no strength for cheering. Just a deep, exhausted exhale of men who now understand. This is real, and it is happening now. The first F-4F Wildcat noses down through the morning haze, flaps dropping. Its wheels kiss coral and skip. The pilot rides it like a bronco, tires carving a wake through gravel, then bumps, slews sideways, rights itself and rolls to the end of the clearing, safe. The Seabees stare. The Marines grin. The second Wildcat touches down. And in that moment, the Japanese lose something strategic and psychological at once. The initiative. This is no longer a disputed landing. It is now an airhead, an American airbase, however fragile, however incomplete. By midday, steel matting stretches farther. Crushed coral thickens the grade. Engineers in filthy dungarees kneel hammering locking pins while fighters refuel from jerry cans and Marines dig anti-aircraft pits along the runway edge. Bulldog efficiency has become battlefield oxygen. That evening, under a bruised purple sky, a Marine liaison pilot walks the torn clearing with Chief Paris. He gestures skyward. "Tomorrow," he tells him quietly. "They'll bomb us for this." Paris nods once, jaw set. "Then we better give them a bigger target." He wipes his palms against his trousers and stalks off toward the dozers. There is no bravado in him, only certainty. The only defense against the Japanese coming storm is finishing sooner than they believe possible. And so, as night thickens and generator lamps flicker to life behind blackout curtains of tarpaulin, the men pick up sledgehammers, levers, chains, and wrenches and keep going. They are not waiting for daylight. The airfield must live before the Japanese can kill it. August 13th, 1942. Early morning. The first Japanese strike finds Guadalcanal half awake. A low, distant drone like thunder rolling in from the sea. Marines shout warnings from foxholes. Gunners swing their barrels west. The sky above the jungle rim flickers with sunlight leaking through stacked cloud banks. And then the silhouettes appear, black specks sharpening into shape. A formation of twin-engine G-4M Betty bombers, escorted by Zero fighters. The Seabees don't run for cover. They finish tightening bolts. When the first bombs fall short, kicking rooster tails of spray from the surf, the Japanese pilots assume the runway can't yet be operational. They expect to terrorize construction crews, crater half-prepared soil, and turn the strip into shredded coral mush. But as the bomb run crests, American wildcats begin taking off, one after another, engines screaming through the half-hardened strip, rooster tails of coral dust whipping behind them. The sight unhinges the Japanese escort pilots, because there is no longer a project on Guadalcanal. There is an airbase. The bombers press in anyway, but they are late by 36 hours. By the time the Bettys line up for their drop, wildcats are clawing altitude, and 5-inch naval guns from Tulagi open up across the water. The sky fractures into black shrapnel puffs. A bomber peels off trailing smoke and spirals into the palms. The Seabees watch from run-out berms, sweat carving streaks through chalk and dust on their faces. One wipes his nose with the back of his wrist and mutters, "Now they know." They do. Up above, the lead Japanese pilot radios back a frantic message to base command. Runway operational. American planes taking off. Rabaul, Japanese Naval Command, August 13th evening. The staff officers gather in a briefing hut sweltering with heat. The message is repeated twice to disbelieving superiors. Landing troops? Expected. Naval fire support? Expected. A functioning airfield within a week? Impossible. Rear Admiral Gunichi Mikawa studies the reconnaissance sketch clipped to the map board. The runway is no longer an idea, no longer coral in its primordial state. It is aligned, braced, and alive with traffic. Worse, it means the United States now controls daylight over Guadalcanal. The Japanese strategy for the Solomons depends on darkness. On the Tokyo Express, nighttime destroyer runs through the slot. Rapid reinforcement, hit and vanish supply lines. But aircraft? Aircraft require daylight. And daylight belongs, suddenly, stunningly, to the Americans. An airstrip that shouldn't exist has just ruptured their operational timeline. Officers mutter behind stiff uniforms. How did they build it so fast? It should take months. They are not engineers. They are combat engineers. No, the staff is told. They are something new. Seabees, Naval Construction Battalions. A fusion of tradesmen and shock troops, men from shipyards and steel mills, trained to fight and build simultaneously. A concept the Imperial Command considered absurd, until raw reality proved otherwise. The order goes out. Guadalcanal must be retaken immediately, before this airfield turns nighttime Japanese initiative into a daytime American hammer. Henderson Field, nightfall, August 14th. The Seabees don't know their work has triggered strategic panic in Rabaul. But they can feel the pressure tightening around them like a noose. The first Wildcats are now parked in revetments shaped from felled logs and sandbags, not pretty, not permanent, but alive. Marine ground crews refuel by hand pump, wiping sweat from their eyes. A grease-smeared corporal jokes, "We've got an Air Corps on credit." A few yards away, flood lamps, shielded from above, cast harsh halos as the Seabees lay more matting. Their knuckles are cracked open, their lips split from coral dust, but they keep driving pins and plates into place, widening the runway with the lunatic urgency of men who can already hear the next bombing raid forming on the horizon. Some are coughing, feverish, tropical rot already in their lungs. None are stopping. Chief Paris walks the edge of the airstrip with a surveyor's eye, voice hoarse as gravel. By tomorrow, we extend another 100 yards. Hard shoulders, taxiway, fuel dump. A Marine sergeant overhears and shakes his head. Tomorrow. Paris doesn't look up. We don't have a later. Before midnight, rain hammers the jungle canopy, a deafening tropical roar. The flood lamps snap off, replaced by dim shielded glow from blackout lanterns. The Seabees huddle beneath tarps stretched over unfinished equipment, but not to sleep. They're welding through the storm, sealing braces, anchoring matting where soft earth still threatens to swallow it. Every clang and torch hiss echoes like defiance. Beyond the perimeter, Japanese infiltration teams are already probing toward the clearing. Small, drifting silhouettes moving with jungle-trained patience. Marines on picket duty catch glimpses through lightning flashes. The Japanese are learning in real time what their commanders now know in Rabaul. The Americans are not occupying Guadalcanal. They are rooting themselves into it. When dawn comes, the stillness before another onslaught. The clearing is longer, stronger, and unmistakably permanent. The Japanese didn't just fail to destroy a runway. They failed to stop an industrial miracle punched into the earth by men who work like a storm front. Air superiority has a birthplace now, and the enemy is starting to understand they might never erase it. August 18th, 1942. Dawn on the ridge above Henderson Field. The jungle is swollen with humidity and silence. A wet gray mist clings to the palms, draping the battlefield like gauze. Beneath that curtain, the Japanese begin to move. a full assault element from Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki's detachment, fresh from landing at Taivu Point. They believe the Marines are a thin screen. They believe the runway is incomplete. They believe the Americans are clinging to the coastline, not dug in like a vice. They have no idea Henderson Field is already defended not by hope, but by air power. Along the perimeter, Marines of the 1st Division settle in behind firing pits at Alligator Creek. Bayonets glint as they fix to rifles. Ammunition crates thud into the mud. The Seabees, hammered by a week of non-stop labor, trade wrenches and hammers for carbines and sidearms. Some fight in grime-caked dungarees, some in torn Navy hats fading to white in the sun. Construction Battalion becomes line infantry overnight. Not because they were ordered to, but because if the runway falls, all their murderous labor dies with it. The Japanese come at night, screaming, bayonets flashing, believing the runways and support crews will panic and fold. Ichiki's officers push their men hard, certain that superior discipline and shock will rout the workmen in khaki. Instead, they crash into a killing field. Marine machine guns rip the jungle open. Mortars bloom white-hot fire across the grass flats. The Seabees plug holes in the line with pistols and borrowed Garans, their hands still red with pulverized coral. A gunner from Navy Construction Battalion 6 empties 2 magazines from a prone position, sweat cutting river tracks down his cheeks. Not my runway, he growls through gritted teeth. The Japanese do not break. They keep coming, wave after wave, until the first gray light of morning shows the scope of the failure. Bodies tangle in the grass. The attack collapses, shattered against a line that should never have existed in the first place. By noon, Ichiki's detachment is annihilated, and Henderson Field still lives. But even as Marines mop up the shattered assault, the second blow arrives, not from the jungle, but the sky. The lookout post shouts, "Betty's inbound, squadron strength." This time the Seabees cannot drop their tools, because this time the runway is about to prove its worth. Engines howl as wildcats launch like thrown spears off the matting. Fresh exhaust fumes drift low across the clearing while gun crews crouch in revetments chewing powder smoke. The Japanese formation crosses the coast, tight, deliberate, sure of its target, and flies straight into the teeth of American fighters that should not be here at all. The first bomber shears apart before it can line up its run. A second limps over the perimeter, mortally wounded, spirals behind the far tree line, and detonates in a rolling thread of black smoke. The enemy has come not to bomb an unfinished strip, but to duel a fortress that built itself out of bedrock and sweat. When the last bomber flees north trailing fire, a stunned hush settles over the engineers crouched along the runway lip. They watch the Wildcats bank low in victory arcs, wings flashing sunlight, then circle to land. And then it hits them. They didn't just build an airfield. They built the machine that saved them. That afternoon, as fuel drums are dragged back into place and mechanics swarm the fighters, a Marine lieutenant passes Chief Paris and shakes his head in disbelief. "You know what they're calling it now?" Paris lifts a brow. "Henderson Field." "After Lofton Henderson," the lieutenant explains, voice quiet. "The Marine pilot killed at Midway. His name stamped on this place now." Paris turns back to the grading site, eyes rimmed red, voice barely above a murmur. "Then we make it hold. Henderson Field is no longer a patch of jungle or an engineering stunt. It is a promise and a threat." Word spreads along the ridgeline as scouts return from patrol. Another assault force is forming deeper in the jungle, larger than the last. The Japanese are not finished, and this time they will not come in haste. They will come prepared. Night falls like a shroud. The engines go silent. The men know the next test is coming, not of machinery, but of endurance. And the Seabees, men who never expected to fight beside Marines in a jungle no blueprint ever dreamed of, now stand guard over the battlefield they built into existence. Tomorrow they will rise again, to pour coral, to lay matting, and, if necessary, to bleed on the same earth they shaped with their bare hands. The impossible isn't finished yet. Late August 1942. Guadalcanal's hunger period begins. The island feels tighter with every passing day. Rations run dry, tropical fevers simmer, and the nights grow louder with the groans of the wounded. Supply lines are barely holding. The Japanese Tokyo Express still slashes through the slot at night, landing shells and men with brutal efficiency. But by day, Henderson Field answers back. The airfield is no longer a tentative scratch in the soil. It is a living artery, rows of revetments, crude maintenance bays, fuel caches stitched together from salvage and sweat. Seabees reinforce the shoulders with more coral, roll new segments smoothed by lantern light, and bulldoze drainage channels to keep monsoon runoff from swallowing the strip whole. They are still working under fire. Sometimes they sprint for cover through strafing runs. Other times they brace a matting strip with their boots while dirt coughs upward from rifle rounds snapping past. War here has no front line. Only the stubborn fact that the runway must never go quiet. One morning, as a wildcat limps home with holes stitched through its wings, a young Seabee mechanic with a torn sleeve jogs alongside the fuselage, banging twice with a wrench. A field signal for, "You're good. I've got you." The plane rolls to a halt and collapses into the revetment, while the crew swarms it like a pit team. They hammer, patch, refuel, reload, minutes, not hours, because Japanese bombers are inbound again before breakfast. The pilots fight in the sky. The Marines fight in the jungle. The Seabees fight the clock. Color drains from their faces. Some are skeletal, others shaking from malaria chills. But when a bulldozer throws a track or a matting section buckles, they drag themselves back to their feet. A broken tool means downtime. Downtime means silence. Silence means vulnerability. Against every instinct of comfort, the machines must keep screaming. September 3rd. The Japanese finally understand. A captured pilot, interrogated by Navy intelligence, admits the obvious. Imperial Command cannot comprehend how the runway still functions. Repeated strikes, bombardment, infiltration, and still it expands. When asked how the enemy views these construction troops, the pilot hesitates, then speaks a single word. Rojin, old men. Men the Japanese believed were soft, unthreatening, unfit for combat. They were wrong. The irony is brutal. The Seabees are not warriors who learn to build. They are builders who learn to outlast warriors. By the second week of September, Henderson Field supports not just fighters, but scouts and dive bombers. The Cactus Air Force, a ragged coalition of Marine, Navy, and Army flyers, now hits Japanese destroyer convoys by daylight, forcing them to withdraw before dawn. Seabees expand hard standings, carve service roads to the perimeter, and even improvise workshops from crashed cargo crates. Every foot of coral they crush is another hour stolen from the Imperial timetable. And still, they eat half rations. And still, they bleed from coral cuts that never quite heal in the island rot. And still, they work with the urgency of men who know death will arrive the moment they pause. Nightfall, September 12th. The jungle breathes in darkness. The men crouch on ammo crates, wiping grime from the sockets of their eyes. On the far horizon, thunder rolls, not from a storm, but from transports and destroyers gunning into position for the largest counterattack yet. The Battle of Bloody Ridge is coming. Henderson Field is secured, but not yet survivable without what comes next. The Marines will hold the ridgeline. The pilots will hold the sky. And the Seabees, exhausted, fevered, undersupplied, now face their greatest test of all. Can a runway survive a siege? Because if it can't, the Marines on that ridge will die in darkness, and the airfield dies with them. The next blow will decide the fate of Guadalcanal. Not a bombardment, not a probe, a full annihilation attempt. The Seabees do not sleep. They wait for dawn. September 13th to 14th, 1942, Bloody Ridge. The Japanese strike at night. Rain lashes the palms sideways as Ichiki's shattered legacy is replaced by a new hammer. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi's assault force, hardened veterans from the Philippines and Malaya. They believe Henderson Field must be retaken tonight, before the Cactus Air Force rises with daylight. Torches are blacked out. Bayonets flash in rain curtains. The jungle breathes war. The Marines on that ridgeline, Colonel Merritt, Red Mike Edson's Raiders, hold against the first attack with rifles that blister their palms and machine guns glowing red hot. The Japanese come again and again. Screaming charges crash into wire, bleed down slopes, vanish in the dark, and return in deeper fury. Back at the airfield, the Seabees hear the thunder of it, the non-stop pounding rifles, the guttural scream of banzai charges swallowed by gunfire. They stand hip-deep in mud around fuel drums and revetments, listening to the ridge burning in the dark. They know if the Japanese crest that hill, the next charge reaches them. There is nowhere to retreat, no fallback line. The runway is the line. At 2 a.m., a Marine runner arrives at Henderson, drenched to the bone. His message: Edson's holding, but barely. If we lose the ridge by dawn, scramble everything you can or scuttle the strip. The Seabees don't answer with words. They restart engines. Bulldozers growl to life in the storm, plowing coral under blackout tarps while tracer fire arcs above the tree line. As if the earth itself is refusing to surrender. Men weld braces for revetments while the horizon flames. Gravel slams into helmets from concussions. They work because if the ridge collapses, this field must launch a last stand in the sky. The siege is complete. Builders working as defenders. Defenders fighting for builders. The final push, just before dawn. The Japanese throw everything, entire battalions rushing the hill in the half-light. Convinced the Americans are spent. They reach the wire. They break through in places. Knuckles go white on rifle stocks. There is hand-to-hand fighting at the crest of the ridge. Bellowed curses drowned by thunder and muzzle flash. But the line does not crack. At the lowest, last moment, when ammunition tins rattle empty, artillery from the airfield slams into the ridge in a rolling barrage. Marine gunners fire blind over open sights, guided by radio from Edson's command post. The Seabees hold the perimeter in grim silence, waiting for the next shock that never comes. Dawn creeps up over a battlefield paved in bodies. Kawaguchi's force is broken, scattered into jungle ruin. Henderson Field still stands, and from its matting, like a drumbeat of inevitability, engines warm for takeoff, American planes roaring into the sky to hunt the fleeing remnants before they can melt away. The Japanese had wagered an entire night assault that the Seabees' miracle could be unraveled by brute force. The miracle only hardened. In the aftermath, a Marine lieutenant trudges down from the ridge, face hollowed by exhaustion, uniform soaked with rain and cordite. He finds the Seabees still welding girders into revetment frames, smoke curling from torches. "You boys ever stop?" he asks. Chief Paris looks up through bloodshot eyes. "Only when they quit trying to kill this place." He turns back to the arc of his welding torch, sparks spraying into rain, as if the siege were merely a scheduling inconvenience. Because now there is no question. Henderson Field is no accident of luck. It is a man-made strong point, forged by stubborn labor, defended by necessity, made permanent by sacrifice. But the campaign is far from finished. The next test will not come from infantry, but from the sea. The Japanese Navy is massing, and what comes next will not be a strike. It will be an attempt to erase the island from the map. October 13th to 15th, 1942, the night of the battleships. The ground quivers before the sound even arrives. Somewhere out beyond the surf, past the black horizon, something massive is moving through the dark. Marines along the line grip their rifles tighter. Pilots sleep in shallow trenches near their planes. And the Seabees, hollow-eyed from fever and exhaustion, pause mid-repair as if the sea itself just shifted. Then the first salvo lands. A column of fire erupts behind the runway, blasting crates, sandbags, and open earth into the air. A second lands closer. The boom rolls through the jungle like a shock front that rattles bone before it reaches the ears. 2 Japanese battleships, Kongo and Haruna, have arrived in the slot, and they have come to pulverize Henderson Field from existence. This is not harassment fire. This is execution. For 80 straight minutes, 14-inch shells blister the earth. Craters swallow matting whole. Revetted fighters are blown end over end like toys. Steel shrieks. Ground crews dive for foxholes as firestorms rip across the taxiway. A shockwave throws a Seabee operator clear off a bulldozer. He rises bleeding, ears ringing, and crawls to shelter behind a fuel drum. The airfield, the miracle that changed the balance of the Solomons, is being unmade shell by shell. The barrage does not stop until just before dawn. When silence finally falls, the jungle hisses with flame. The morning after, a wasteland that still breathes. The runway is cratered in 50 places. Matting twists like torn ribbon. Smoke coils up from the revetments where planes once slept under canvas roofs. The Cactus Air Force looks gutted. A Marine private whispers what everyone is thinking. It's gone. But the Seabees are already moving. While corpsmen drag the wounded to cover, the bulldozers lurch back to life. Craters are surveyed, drainage lines recut, salvageable mats stacked and hammered flat. Tractor treads chew the ruined coral until the smashed runway becomes raw material again. There is no pause for shock, only triage. Aviation fuel dumped into pits burns black across the clearing. Engines howl beside bodies still waiting to be carried off. Smoke turns the airfield into a furnace, and still they work, boots sinking ankle-deep in churned mud and powder. A Marine lieutenant watches in disbelief. They're rebuilding a runway during a funeral. War's not waiting for the burial detail. A Seabee replies without looking up. 2 days later, another air raid. Then another. Then another. The Japanese now cycle between night shelling and day bombing, a strangulation intended to keep the field down permanently. But every time the sky clears, the Seabees push the matting back into place. Wildcats return one by one. SBD, dauntless dive bombers limp back onto patched ground that barely qualifies as a runway, but lands planes anyway. The miracle is no longer speed. The miracle is endurance. This is no longer 10 days of superhuman effort. This is 10 weeks of refusing to die. And still the Japanese do not believe it is possible. From Rabaul to Truk, Imperial Command assumes the Americans are surviving on fumes, that collapse is imminent, that a decisive push, just one more hammer blow, will finally crush Henderson Field and turn Guadalcanal back into jungle. They do not understand what they are facing. Not Marines alone, not pilots alone, but an industrial mind, American ingenuity, landed on an island and given a heartbeat. What comes next will decide it all. The Japanese cannot win this island while the runway lives. The Americans cannot hold it if the runway fails. The final contest is no longer infantry against infantry. It is destruction versus reconstruction, bombardment versus persistence. A battleship's shell versus a bulldozer blade. The next assault will be the largest yet. A last attempt to tear Henderson Field back out of the earth before it becomes permanent enough to doom the entire Japanese southern strategy. Late October. The Japanese gamble everything. Henderson Field is still battered but alive, which means Japan is running out of time. Tokyo pushes a massive reinforcement convoy south, troop transports, escorts, and heavy guns, all converging to deliver a decisive blow and roll the Americans back into the surf. They plan to overwhelm the island from 3 directions: sea, sky, jungle, a synchronized kill strike. But for the first time since August, the U.S. now has something it never had before: momentum. The Cactus Air Force, ragged, patched, coughing black smoke from half-repaired engines, can finally launch enough sorties to matter. The Seabees have widened the taxiways, extended revetments, improvised bomb racks, and hammered the runway flat again so fighters can surge aloft in minutes instead of trickles. The Japanese convoy rounds the northern island chain on the night of October 25th. Transport ships stacked with thousands of infantry approach the slot under heavy escort. But sunrise belongs to Henderson Field. When dawn burns off the marine layer, the Seabees are still welding, still grading, still tamping rubble into usable earth. Exhausted hands giving birth to air power for a third time. Engines cough, then roar. Wave after wave of American aircraft, Wildcats, Dauntlesses, and Avengers, claw into the sky and descend on the convoy like hawks falling on a school of fish. Bombs bloom in the sea. Plumes of water rise next to hulls. A troop transport erupts in a rising pillar of orange and smoke. Another slews off course, dead in the water. Japanese commanders stare in disbelief. Henderson Field was supposed to be ash. It is instead a gun aimed at the sea. The jungle answers next, October 26th to 27th. While the convoy reels, Japanese infantry still push inland, determined to overrun the strip by sheer pressure. They hurl themselves at the perimeter night after night, trying to break a hole before the U.S. can recover fully. Seabees rotate from tool to tool again, dig, fight, reinforce, fight. The line between engineer and soldier erased by necessity. They drag ammunition to forward pits in wheelbarrows built for gravel. They reinforce revetments with shattered matting and palm trunks. They tear open crates for anything that might stop shrapnel. Sleep becomes a rumor. Every minute the field remains usable is another American strike launched. Another transport sunk, another assault blunted. And the Japanese begin to bleed, time they cannot replace. By the end of the month, Imperial Command sees the truth at last. They are not fighting Marines on an island. They are fighting an airfield that refuses to die. The decisive moment, November 12th to 15th. The Japanese Navy throws its last great blow. A massive night bombardment, followed by an escort force pushing troop ships into Iron Bottom Sound. The sea becomes a furnace of tracers and wreckage, cruisers sinking, destroyers ramming, battleships firing blind into the dark. It is chaos, but Henderson Field still breathes. When dawn breaks on the 14th, American aircraft lift off yet again. This time fully battle-ready. They pounce on the damaged convoy and annihilate what remains. Transports burn in the surf. Lifeboats scatter. Reinforcements meant to retake the island die still aboard their ships. The runway, that once mud clearing carved from jungle by Union hands and willpower, has cut the Japanese advance off at the knees. This is the turning point. The Japanese High Command stops calling Guadalcanal an objective and starts calling it a disaster. Up and down Henderson's blasted length, Seabees stand in silence as the last smoke columns drift toward the dawn. Some lean on shovels, others slump against bulldozer tracks. A few simply sit in the coral-stained mud, too wrung dry to speak. They are gaunt, burned by sun, chewed by malaria, but undefeated. What was once impossible has become inevitable. Guadalcanal will not fall, because Henderson Field did not fall. The final chapter is no longer about building the airstrip. It is about what it cost to keep it alive. January 1943. The jungle finally exhales. The last organized Japanese evacuation slips under cover of darkness across Iron Bottom Sound. What was meant to be the graveyard of a Marine division has become the graveyard of the Japanese Southern strategy. The enemy does not launch another serious attempt to retake Guadalcanal. The battle is decided, not by a single charge or glorious fleet action, but by a strip of coral no wider than a county road, kept alive by men who were never supposed to be on the front line in the first place. The Seabees, men who once poured concrete for churches, strung telephone lines across farmland, welded bridges under peacetime sun, now stand as the reason the Pacific Theater did not collapse in its opening year. They were not trained as assault troops, yet they landed in the first wave. They were not meant to be infantry, yet they fought like infantry when the perimeter buckled. They were not supposed to perform miracles, but they did one anyway. Henderson Field was not merely repaired, it was resurrected again and again inside the blast radius of naval gunfire. The Japanese would later admit in debriefings and war diaries that they never understood how the runway kept reappearing. A ghost airfield, some soldiers called it. There by morning, cratered by nightfall, rebuilt by morning again. They believed the Americans had an entire engineering regiment hidden inside the jungle. But there were barely 1,000 men, working beyond exhaustion. One Seabee officer put it flatly. We didn't have replacements. If we stopped, the air stopped. If the air stopped, we died. The Cactus Air Force flew only because those bulldozers never fell silent, because shovels and rollers and sweat held the perimeter together as surely as rifles. You can measure a runway in feet, but in Guadalcanal, it was also measured in hours of survival bought. Years later, historians would say Guadalcanal was the hinge on which the Pacific War turned, but it is just as true to say the hinge itself was a runway. Before Guadalcanal, Japan advanced. After Guadalcanal, Japan retreated. That reversal began the moment the Seabees made a decision most armies would have considered lunacy: to build an airfield inside artillery range and refuse to let it die. Today, pilots land on Henderson Field unaware that beneath their wheels lies ground that once boiled under bombardment. The jungle has grown back around the perimeter, and the coral has been paved over. But the bones of that first airstrip still lie beneath it, welded into the soil by the will of exhausted men with blistered hands and fever in their blood. The Marines defended Guadalcanal. The pilots struck the convoys. But the Seabees, the quiet, stubborn craftsmen of war, made both possible. What held that island was not luck or numbers or even strategy. It was the simplest, most American weapon of all: build and do not stop.